If you enjoy our videos and podcasts and would like us to continue putting out regular quality content, head over to patreon.com/aircrewinterview, where you can donate monthly, and in return you will get rewards ranging from early interview viewings, bonus clips, credited as a producer, and much more. Thank you and enjoy. So Joe, when did you first become interested in aviation?
I first became interested in aviation when I was a little boy. I grew up on the East Coast of the U.S., up in the Northeast in Maine. And I lived next to the Brunswick Naval Air Station back when it was still open.
Oh,
And
wow.
my dad tells me stories of we lived under the base to final turn, for the Naval Air Station. So constantly we had airplanes, flying overhead. Back then it was the P-3 Orion that the Navy
Yeah.
still flies. And he would tell me stories about how I would be terrified of these airplanes as they flew overhead until one day he pointed out to me, he's like, there's people flying those things just like you. I was about 5 years old. And he said at that moment, the switch flipped in my brain. And from that point on, it was game on. So I was one of those little boys that my dad took me to air shows, when I was a kid, and always had that interest and had the magazines and the videos and tried to gather as much, knowledge as I could about it all. And then decided when I was about 15 years old that I was going to start taking flying lessons. So my parents, kind of supported me in that. But they said, hey, if you're going to start taking flying lessons, you're going to have to, help figure out a way to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
So, go ahead and get a little job and we'll help you out. And it was that's kind of how it all started.
Awesome. But I was interested, this is a side question, but why did you go for the US Air Force rather than the Navy?
Um, I lived in a Navy town, and I had too
Uh-huh.
many Navy pilots tell me that if you were going to go fly airplanes for the military, go fly for the Air Force. So,
Right, okay, I see.
but no, the idea, I think the idea of flying off a carrier and doing all that stuff would be an absolute thrill. But the reality is that the Air Force was kind of the direction that I wanted to go. So just in terms of the lifestyle, the variety of airplanes, the places that I was going to be able to live, that was a little bit more attractive to me. So it ended up working out very well.
Yeah, awesome. So what year did you actually join the US Air Force, and can you tell us some of the aircraft you started training on?
Yeah, so I was able to get into the Air Force through an ROTC scholarship program at the university that I went to down in Embry-Riddle in Daytona Beach, Florida. So through that program, I was able to compete for and earn a pilot slot in the U.S. Air Force. And once I commissioned in 2005, I then went to pilot training at Moody Air Force Base in Valdosta, Georgia. And there I flew the T-6 Texan II, the new, at that time, the new Air Force trainer that was replacing the T-37. Moody was one of the first locations to actually fly that airplane. So it was a real treat to be able to go and fly the T-6. Flies like a P-51 Mustang. I mean, it's
Oh, really?
absolutely incredible how much power and how maneuverable that thing is. And talk about the ultimate, training airplane.
Yeah.
Fast, efficient, aerobatic. It's
Mhm.
incredible. From there, I had our class had a unique opportunity in that there were enough fighter slots to go around. But in going through the program and learning about lifestyles and learning about all of the different aspects of aviation, I knew that traveling around the world and doing more of that kind of flying was what I was a little bit more drawn to at that time.
Yeah.
So I chose to go fly I chose to go the heavy track.
Mhm.
So I went to go fly the T1, and that training took place at Columbus Air Force Base in Mississippi. And that was actually a lot of fun. You know, small business jet, getting a chance
Hmm.
to bounce around all over the southeastern U.S. and have a blast and take my friends with me. So we had a good time doing that. And then from there, after flying the T1, uh, the way that we have something called a drop night. And on drop night, you know, you get to choose the airplane that you're going to be flying. And at that time, I selected the KC-135,
Hmm.
and that took me back to Tampa, Florida, which I had really wanted to move back to and enjoy living down there for a little while.
So yeah, obviously you got posted to the 135, but what were your initial thoughts when you got up close to the aircraft?
I actually really enjoyed flying that airplane. It was the mission was tremendously versatile from the standpoint of the different agencies and organizations that we had an opportunity to work with.
Hmm.
Not only were we working with Navy aircraft and Marine aircraft, but we're and Air Force aircraft, but we're working with fighters, we're working with heavies, we're working with bombers, and we had an opportunity during the time that I was flying it to work with a lot of international organizations as well, foreign militaries. We would refuel aircraft from every different military that was serving in the Middle East. While I was there, and just and the diversity of mission as well, from the cargo side to the dragging fighters halfway across the planet,
Hmm.
getting a chance to stage at all kinds of different locations. And it was a fun mission. I really did enjoy it. The airplane's a pilot's airplane, really,
Hmm.
stick and rudder kind of jet. And you really have to be pretty skilled in order to fly that thing around.
Hmm.
Um, so I really enjoyed it. But at about the I flew it for two assignments, and after the second assignment flying the airplane, I was an instructor in the aircraft. I was highly experienced in it, and I had to make a choice at that point as far as which direction I was going to go. Was I
Hmm.
going to go to the schoolhouse and teach brand new students in the KC 135? Was I going to go to a staff non-flying assignment, which no pilot wants to do, as you know?
Yeah.
Or was I going to choose something else?
Hmm.
So the something else is, I think, what we're going to talk a little bit more about today.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm just going to rewind a bit there, Joel, before we get into, the whole topic of why we're here. And did
Sure.
you have a favourite aircraft you liked to refuel or a nation? I don't know if that's even a thing. Did you enjoy like flying with F-16s or, tornadoes?
Yeah, the tornado guys were fantastic.
Hmm.
We had an opportunity to work with them quite a bit in Iraq and Afghanistan. Um, as far as a favorite airplane is concerned, the most challenging airplanes to refuel were probably the C-17s, to be honest
Mm.
with you. They have such this large bow wave that they create as they approach the airplane, that especially as you're practicing with the autopilot off and you're completely hand flying with two airplanes that size in such close proximity to one another,
Yeah.
the disturbance of the air that the C-17 creates really does tend to shake and move the one third of the tanker around as it's as they're refueling. So especially in turbulence or poor weather, that really does start to become kind of challenging. But that's kind of on the challenge side. On the fun side, fly, being able to work with fighters is always awesome. I had the opportunity to refuel the Thunderbirds,
Oh, wow.
as they transit to and from shows. Had opportunities to work with all different nations, from the Italians to the Dutch, to the French, the Germans. I mean, we really, really did a lot internationally, and that was, of course, during a lot of my time spent in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yeah, so how many hours did you get on the type and did you enjoy your time on the 135?
In the KC 135, I believe that I finished flying that airplane with just over 3,000 hours in
Wow.
the airplane. So quite a few hours in the airplane by Air Force standards. I flew quite a bit, and I really did enjoy the airplane. I had the opportunity to fly all around the world, both east and west. Bouncing around to so many different countries and so many different locations, And I really was able to fulfill kind of the original reason why I went to that airplane, which was to kind of see the world, experience that, participate in a mission where I had a chance to work with a lot of different types of people, organizations, nations, nationalities, um, and really enjoyed that. So yeah,
Awesome. And obviously, we're here to talk about the U-2, and you got to see the world from a completely different perspective.
very
So
true.
let's talk about how do you even apply to be a U-2 pilot? Are you picked or you chosen? Talk us through that process, Joel.
So the U-2 program itself, you have to apply to. So I was fortunate enough that I had several friends that prior to me had gone to the U-2 program.
Right.
One of my instructors from pilot training had gone to the U-2 program. While I was still going through pilot training, he was selected. So I knew about it from fairly
Hmm.
early on. And then a very good friend of mine, who was my college roommate and lived together for a while, we went to pilot training together, kind of parted ways. And then he got to the U-2 program and he told me, Joel, you have to come check this out. He's like, this is one of the coolest things you will ever do. It is Air Force flying the way it has always been. It's the ultimate, big boy program, if you will. It's
Hmm.
varsity flying at its best.
Wow.
And I said, this sounds interesting. So I started doing my research, started learning about the airplane, learning about the history of the airplane, and talking to friends of mine, as far as what it does and what the missions are like. And I decided that was the direction that I really wanted to go. But the challenge was getting accepted into the program.
Yeah.
Um, it truly is a brotherhood of folks that share this common bond. And when you are a part of this brotherhood, you are a part of something very, very special. And they're very careful, and selective about who they bring into this program, because for a lot of different reasons, but primarily being, flying the airplane, employing the airplane, being able to trust the individual to perform, anywhere in the world under any circumstances, completely by yourself, on your own, as they say, alone and unafraid. And it's a very tight knit group of people. And then ultimately, it's a very difficult airplane to fly. It's very much a stick and rudder airplane. It's not a by the numbers kind of airplane. You really have to get a good seat of the pants feel for it. So all that being said, what I'm trying to get at is you have to apply to the program, interview for the program. It's an extensive selection process. And then once you go for the interview, you have to fly the airplane in order to prove that you can meet the
Hmm.
learning curve. So we can chat a little bit about that. But um, uh, long answer to your question, you have to apply to the program in order to be selected.
Brilliant. And before we move on, is it a more, this might be an old term or phrase, but is it who you know rather than what you know in that kind of community?
Not necessarily, although,
Okay.
as you know, in a lot of aspects of life, it certainly doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
When so so when you initially apply to the program, the first thing that happens is what we call the bro check. Everybody knows who the applicants are, and the emails go out, and the shouts down the hall go out about, hey, do you know this guy? Is he a
Right.
good
Yeah.
guy?
Yeah.
And of course, 99% of the time, it's military pilots. As you know, it's a very small community,
Yeah.
so there's a very good chance that somebody knows, who you are, or somebody knew somebody else that knew who you were. So it usually doesn't take long to find out, who that individual is, and find out, about their character. But I mean, at the end of the day, as military aviators, it's folks are generally pretty great people. So that's just kind of like the, hey, is this a good person? Do we want to bring him in here and have him be a part of us, or her? At that point in time, after you're invited to come and participate in the interview, you'll show up, and it's a 2 week long interview process. The first
Wow.
week is, yeah, so the first week is all one-on-one interviews. You sit down with the commanders, you sit down with the directors of operations, you sit down with those folks from both squadrons,
Hmm.
the schoolhouse squadron as well as the operational squadron that we have at Beale. And you just kind of chat with them, and it's as much of an interview for you looking at them as it is for them looking at you, because it is such a unique program,
Hmm.
and it's so foreign to folks. They want to make sure that you want to be there as well.
Of course, yeah.
So so they really have a great attitude towards that aspect of the interview. It's very well understood that you're looking at them, or just as much as vice versa.
Yeah.
So the latter portion of the week, so in the middle of the week, you start looking at the spacesuit, right? Because
Which we're
the
gonna have to get
spacesuit.
onto later. I've got a few questions
Yeah,
on
we'll
that.
get
Really
to that
interested
later
in
on. But
that.
you do a claustrophobia check in the suit to make sure that you don't freak out. Because sometimes people have issues with something, putting on that helmet, having something that close to their face. Honestly, sometimes it just can't. People just can't deal with it, no matter how much mind over matter
Hmm.
you try and apply. And then the latter portions of the week start to consist of briefings for your interview flights, which will take place the following week.
Hmm.
And those interview flights are low pattern only sorties, where you will go up in one of our 2-seat aircraft. There are a handful of 2-seat U-2 aircraft which we use for interviews and initial pilot training, and you will go and fly those aircraft 3 times, and you will prove to your evaluator pilots that you can meet the learning curve of that airplane.
And they're dual
And
stick.
yes, it's dual controls,
Yeah.
and the students actually sitting in the back of the airplane, the
Okay.
instructors sitting up front, and you will go and flight characteristics of the airplane. You'll run through a stall series, really try and get a good feel for the airplane, because as I said, it's a stick and rudder airplane. It's not a by the numbers kind of thing. There's very few numbers to know when it comes to flying the airplane. You kind of have to get into it, and you wear it, you feel it. As they say, it's the dragon lady. They say, it's like dancing with the dragon, right? So you kind of have to just be able to become part of the airplane.
Hmm.
Down low, it flies like a dump truck with wings. You really have to manhandle it around the sky. Very heavy in the flight controls, in the ailerons, but actually relatively pitch sensitive. And there's a lot of adverse yaw with the length of the wings and the relatively short fuselage. So, there's a lot of different movements of the flight controls that are taking place in order to get the airplane around the sky. So it takes a lot, and from beginning to end, it's been a while since I've seen the actual numbers, but my understanding when I left the program was we accept about 20% of the folks that end up applying from the beginning
Wow.
of the application process to the end.
Wow. Bloody hell, that's yeah. You're up there with like almost like astronauts, aren't you, in terms of like numbers?
There have not been a whole lot of folks that have flown the airplane since
Hmm.
the mid '50s, when the airplane came into service. There's been just over 1,000 people that have flown the airplane. I was
Is that
number
it?
937.
Wow. Bloody hell.
So not a tremendous amount of folks. I think I saw recently one of our guys on a little special said there's more folks that have Super Bowl rings than people that have flown the U-2.
That's probably yeah. I think I've
Yeah.
seen that. So, Joe, what type of aircraft is a U-2, and what was it originally designed for?
So the U-2 is a high altitude intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance aircraft that is currently employed by the U.S. Air Force. The history of the airplane is pretty special. Back in the mid 50s, the Department of Defense requested that there be an airplane that can overfly the Soviet Union and can provide high altitude imagery of bomber locations and missile locations and things of that nature. So they, of course, had a few options as far as manufacturers that they could go to, but
Hmm.
there weren't many folks back then that were working on highly sensitive black projects.
Yeah.
And probably the most well-known and most successful of those individuals was Kelly Johnson with the Lockheed Skunk Works. So back in, I believe it was 1955, they went to Kelly Johnson and they made the proposal, and Kelly Johnson came back with the support of the Lockheed Skunk Works and said, I think we can do this for you. And they took 9 months from the time that the drawings were initially made to the time where the first
9 months.
prototype aircraft. Very, very fast.
Wow.
Very, very fast. And of course, this was before a lot of the red tape and
Yeah, yeah.
everything else that goes into
Hmm.
government acquisition today. But with programs that were this highly classified, there were very few people that knew about it. And when the president gave the go ahead, the money just kind of flowed in their direction, and
Yeah.
they were able to get it done. So uh, the airplane itself, they essentially took the basics of an F-104 starfighter
Yeah.
fuselage, and they put these glider wings on the airplane. They modified a bunch of things, and in any way or shape that they possibly could, they tried to save weight.
Hmm.
Um, so that's why the landing gear configuration is as it is. The
Hmm.
bicycle landing gear with the big main wheel, single main wheel, and then the smaller tail wheel in the back of the airplane. That tail wheel is it's a double wheel side by side, but they are like a hardened polyurethane, almost like a roller coaster wheel.
Oh, really?
Um, yeah. So in any, so by eliminating the rubber, off of the back of the wheel and, this hardened polyurethane, again, it's just another way of trying to save a little bit of
Of
weight.
course.
Uh, Instead of putting wheels or, retractable gear in the wings to help support the wings, we have what we call pogos, which are these wheels that just install in little holes on the wings itself. The weight of the wings hold the pogos
Hmm.
in place, and then just before takeoff, ground crews pull pins out of the pogos, and as the wings flex on initial takeoff, the pogos tumble away and fall onto the pavement as the aircraft takes off into the sky. So uh, a lot of these really innovative concepts and designs were put into practice by the Skunk Works back then to try and save as much weight as possible, because the goal was to fly above 60,000 feet.
Hmm.
At that time, 60,000 feet was the magic number, because we believed as a defense department that the Soviet Union didn't have missiles that could reach
Yeah.
at altitudes above 60,000 feet. Initially, when they needed to find the individuals who were going to fly the airplanes, they looked at the U.S. Air Force, and they decided that it wasn't going to be members of the Air Force that were going to fly the
Hmm.
airplane. So what they did is they recruited individuals from the U.S. Air Force. They interviewed them in the style that they did back then, where they said, "Hey, we've got a great deal for you. We can't really tell you what it is or where you're going or what you're doing, but it's going to be really cool. Would you like to participate?" And from the individuals that said yes, they were able to resign their commission as a U.S. Air Force officer, and they were brought into the CIA. And from that point forward, they worked for the CIA. They were given a bump in salary and some other benefits that went
Yeah.
along with that in order to be away for their families for such long periods of time. It was usually a defined contract, if you will. Um, and when the Air Force, when they started training with these aircraft, they had to figure out a location to train at. Obviously, with an airplane that was this highly classified and this secret, You can't just train at any U.S. military installation
Yeah.
because everybody's going to see it. So they had to find a place where it was going to be fairly remote, and nobody was the likelihood of somebody seeing what was going on was very low. So they decided that they were going to find this location out in the middle of a Nevada lake bed north of what we know as Las Vegas today. And they started, training. They set up a tent city out there, and they brought all of their new or soon-to-be U-2 pilots there to show them the airplane for the first time and train them on flying the airplane. That's where they developed a lot of their, techniques and procedures that we know of today. And the nickname of that location was Watertown, which, if you know your history, Watertown became what is known today as Area 51. So the very first purpose of that, alleged airfield is was actually a U-2 training facility. So,
wow.
So yeah, so the CIA continued to fly the airplane, I believe, to the early 70s or so. And then it was fully transitioned over to the U.S. Air Force, and we are still flying the airplane today. Although it is a different airplane than what they were flying back then. The airplanes we're flying today were built in the early 80s, and it's larger, it's faster, it flies higher, and of course has been upgraded, with the latest in terms of electronics and avionics in the airplane.
Yeah, and we'll certainly get onto that, like the specifics of that type of aircraft later on. But let's talk about your training. So, how did you start to, I guess, think about, because the landing baffles me. And the is it the takeoff? You have the chase car as well, or is it just the landing?
It's actually the takeoff and the landing, and there's a lot more. There's a lot more that the chase car and the pilot that's driving the chase car does. So
talk us through that.
So one of the unique aspects of the U-2 aircraft is a lot of people believe that it's a single seat airplane and you're flying it by yourself. And technically that is true. However, you have a co-pilot. He just doesn't happen to be in the airplane with you. Yeah. So we have a chase car that operates alongside the U-2 in all aspects of its operation. And that chase car is driven by another U-2 pilot. And that other U-2 pilot has a lot of different responsibilities. He is the backup pilot for the mission that you're going to be flying, but also he is a safety observer, and he is kind of just your backup to everything that is happening, over the course of the mission, and also is, just somebody that kind of coordinates anything on the ground that needs to happen, whether it be maintenance problems, whether it be emergencies. He really is your backup, because when you're in the aircraft as the pilot flying, they say that when you put on that spacesuit, your IQ is cut in half. It's just something that happens. You of course get used to it after a while, but things become exponentially more difficult when you're in the airplane operating with these oven mitts on your hands and the fishbowl on your head. Things just are naturally more difficult. So that chase car is there to operate, to back you up, provide assistance in emergencies, to really be a safety observer, and really coordinates the dance, if you will. From the time that you start briefing to the time that you finish debriefing, the mission, they're there along the way.
Wow, so they're it's quite labor intensive in terms of, putting all that onto one pilot, the chase pilot. That's a lot to deal with for one flight.
It is, but it's a lot of fun, and it's just, to be able to, let's be honest, to be able to jump into a Camaro or a Charger or something like that, be driving alongside, a U-2 out to the runway.
You're not going to complain, are you?
What's that?
You're not going to complain.
No, certainly not going to complain. To be able to drive out to the runway, work with the maintenance crew to get everything ready, to make sure that the pilot and the aircraft are 100% ready to fly. As you pull up next to that jet on the runway just before he's getting ready to take off, and you give him the all clear salute as he's cleared for takeoff. I put the car in reverse and back up just a couple feet, and as the pilot pushes up the power, the sound of that engine and the power that you feel as he accelerates, the engine up to max thrust and begins his takeoff roll. I'll tell you what, there's nothing like that in the world. And I'll start my run next to, the U-2 as he's starting to roll, and seeing that thing take off in such a short distance and then pull up and just rocket towards the sky. That is just honestly one of the most incredible sights that you will ever see. So,
yeah, I've seen a couple of YouTube videos, and it looks like almost like a fighter jet, in burner going up, but like that engine and then wings, it literally soars, doesn't it? So it looks vertical on video. But
it is a rocket ride. Mm-hmm. A lightweight airplane, you could easily get up to about 40 degrees nose high on that initial climb out, which when you're in the airplane, it feels like you're going straight up. But the thing is that it doesn't, you don't stop. You just continue to climb out at that deck angle, until you get up, to 13, 14, 15,000 feet before you really start to come down from that kind of deck angle. Otherwise, it is just a rocket ride up.